Hafaday, I'm Amanda Dedicatoria, and welcome to the 2022 Guam International Film Festival Filmmaker Panel Series. The Guam International Film Festival's mission is to foster the growth of cross-cultural understanding through the art of filmmaking. We achieve this by providing free film education and promoting cultural understanding throughout our communities. This week, we'll be taking a look at film and aging, where we will talk about the concept of aging on screen with 5 panelists, along with our moderator, Dr. Tom Brislin. Our first panelist is Nina Taitano, a high school student producer whose most recent credit was her role as producer on the 30-minute PBS Guam documentary Camp, or creating inspiring media producers. We would also like to welcome Deborah Glazier, a regional Emmy Award-winning filmmaker who has produced several award-winning shorts that have been featured in festivals both nationally and internationally. In this year's film festival, Deborah is also a Grand Jury Award nominee in the Best Narrative Short category for Ready Forward. Our third panelist loves cooking, hiking, and thinking about the nature of existence. Dr. James Sellmann has an extensive background in psychology and philosophy. He is the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences and a professor of philosophy and Micronesian Studies at the University of Guam. We would also like to welcome actor Dennis Chun to our panel. His career spans over more than 40 years, and he has appeared in several series such as Hawaii Five-0 and Magnum P.I., along with numerous theater productions. And in addition, we are excited to welcome Stasia, Droze, Jost, an Emmy Award-winning producer, director, writer, and editor for Ballet Hawaii's PSA, #ArtsBeyondCovid. This is so exciting. We're so glad to have all of you. Moderating our session today will be Emeritus Professor and retired Associate Dean of the College of Arts, Languages, and Letters at the University of Hawaii. Dr. Tom Brislin's career in media production, management, and education began on Guam. He was twice a Fulbright Scholar in Germany and has led teaching and research projects at major universities in Japan, China, Paris, and Berlin. And we're excited and so grateful to say that Dr. Brislin returns to the GIF jury for his 12th consecutive year. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amanda, for that kind introduction, and welcome to all of our panelists. This is the second in the series of the Cinemaolek Discussion Series on humanities and film. We've had one discussion on film and diversity. We'll have 2 more coming up on film and war and film and representation. Today, we're going to be discussing film and
recording
aging.
In progress.
I'm going to begin the questioning with the youngest member of our panel, Nina Taitano, who completed a documentary with another a group of young and upcoming filmmakers where they explored media literacy and the images that influence our thinking, our opinions on life. And I'd like to ask you, Nina, what are the images that you've seen of the elderly and of aging, and how do they represent what you learned about media literacy? Do they tend to reflect reality, or do they give an entirely different vision?
Okay, so from my perspective, I haven't really seen that much of the elderly in the film industry. However, when I do, they always tend to be seen as sickly or kind of like a burden to society, which I think is completely false. All of the elderly that I've grown up with, for example, like my grandma, she's very healthy and she is actually very knowledgeable, and she always gives me advice on life and how to go through things. And I think that media, it gives us a false perspective of the elderly. And I really hope one day that will change and it will actually show somewhat more of a truthful aspect towards it.
Thank you. I'm sorry to say that from my experience, it's been quite similar to yours. I know that when I began in the business, the main images of elderly was that their colons were too tight and they suffered from constipation, or their dentures were too loose and they had to buy some product to keep their teeth in their mouths and they weren't able to eat apples or corn on the cob or anything else. So, but at the same time, the boomer generation, of which I am a proud early member, continues to be an economic force, which means we are seeing more images now of films, but they tend to be directed more to an elderly population or our peer groups rather than to a broad audience. So let me go over to Deborah, who is the producer and executive producer and writer of one of our GIF films, Ready Forward. And could you comment on what's the audience that you had in mind when you wrote and produced Ready Forward? And also have a small cameo appearance in the film too, I believe.
Just a wee one. The audience I had in mind is not elderly in a sense that people think elderly is old, because I think that the topic, the subject of this, which is really a love story, and the power of forgiveness in an aging couple's relationship. And aging really, I mean, can be from 50 and over. It could be in any relationship, really, but in this case, the message is that the older you get, time is fleeting, and so today is all we have. So make the best of what you have, and that includes forgiveness early on, right? Like, let's make our relationship the best that it can be. So to answer your question, the audience is really 50 and over. And, ironically, I mean, people don't know that the elderly population makes up a huge percentage of a market. And so it would be neat to tap into that, not from a sickly point of view, like Nina said, just that, that tends to focus on ailments, but just that we can live our best lives as we age.
Dennis, in the film, your character does suffer some health problems, but also exhibits an amazing amount of strength. Could you comment on the strength that you saw in the character and how that was portrayed in the film?
Well, George, who's the character I played, of course, does suffer a rather serious illness. But I think through it all, there is a basic search in him for love, and that gives him strength. He's looking for love. He wants to hear the words, "I love you." To me, that was like so critical, and he keeps asking for that. And at the end, he finds the strength in forgiving or asking his wife, why did you marry me? And when she can't say, "I love you" right then, he sort of takes a moment and says, "That's it. Okay, I can accept that." There's a strength in that. I think when you're dealing with elderly people or anyone who is, how you define elderly, there is a certain strength that comes from living the experiences of life, a certain understanding that certain things just don't turn out the way you want them. But you have to accept that, and you have to go on. You have to keep searching for what you're looking for. Dreams don't end when you're old. Dreams continue. Dreams will go with you all the way to your die. And I think part of that was George. He still had a dream. He still had a hope. Unfortunately, things happen. And maybe at the end, maybe he heard those words, maybe he didn't. And I think that's something we all can question ourselves at the end. What are those words we want to hear when our time comes, when it says, "Hey, it's time"? What are the 3 words you may want to hear that justifies your whole journey?
Stasia, you were also a producer of this very fine short film. It also deals with regrets, and not only forgiveness of others, but self-forgiveness as well. Would you care to comment on how you saw the film and how you see it playing to an audience that may be younger than the characters portrayed.
First off, the way that I saw the film was as a producer was wanting to bring this amazing script from Deb to my husband, who was the director. I was fortunate enough to care deeply about the two of them and care very much about this wonderful story that Deb wrote. And I did see the audience as much broader than just older folks, because part of what Deb really wanted to say is don't run out of time. And that's an important message for young people so that they don't grow up regretting things that they've not done. And so something for a young person to understand before they get too old is all along the way, don't have regrets. And I think it's an important message. My children, our children, Deb also has teenagers like I do, and our children appreciated, embraced that. And they have grandparents who are ailing. I did want to comment that something that I'm working on and that Deb and I have talked about is as our parents are aging, and not as strong as they were, there's also a way, I think, for us to tell a story. And we're kind of talking about what that might look like, that does show the beauty of young people surrounding older people and learning from them as they decline, and the compassion and kindness that can come from being a caregiver, and knowing that there is value in the experiences that we can have with ailing folks. So not to be afraid of those years as we get older, and that we might have those kinds of challenges.
Dean Sellmann, we've been looking at the portrayal of the elderly in film up to this point from a very Western perspective. I know that you have some multicultural expertise. Can you comment at all on how the elderly, how the aged are viewed in different cultures, perhaps even starting with Guam and other indigenous and Asian cultures, as opposed to the Western view?
Oh, that's a complex question. Thank you. I was thinking, this generation gap thing is very, very ancient. There are ancient letters of parents complaining that their children aren't sustaining the cultural values anymore. They're over 2,000 years old. So this is as old as the human race, I would say. When I was living in Taiwan, I would notice that usually a lady would get up and give her seat to an elderly gentleman. And as I started to talk to people, often it seemed that their father had just recently passed away and they were thinking about their family. But aside from that, I never really saw a man get up and give his seat to a grandmother. And so, you hear about filial piety in Chinese society. And so I started talking to people and asking, like, what's going on here? I thought we respect our elders in Chinese culture. And then it came for, well, you respect the elders in your family and maybe your extended family. And so globally, it's happening everywhere across Asia, where the elderly are being displaced and further marginalized now because of modernization and urbanization.
So I'd like to piggyback on that because I'm an actor, and as actors age, the roles become less and less. I think in recent years, that trend is changing. But what excited me so much about this project was that Dennis and Amy are, I would say, aging. I don't want to say elderly because I don't think of you as being elderly in the old sense, but they are aged actors, and the opportunity, especially for two Asian lead actors, have been slim. And so this was a really neat opportunity to have them both have lead roles in this project, which, aside from just the subject of the film, as professional actors, it was such a treat to have them be the principals.
And if I could just add one thing I wanted to say that I was thinking of is you mentioned the strength, and in portraying this character, of course, an actor relives a lot of moments in his life. And I remember my father toward the end of his life, facing what he faced, but facing with courage and dignity as much as he could. And what appealed to me about the story was that it wasn't just aging, and it wasn't just, a cultural story. It was a universal story of two people who somehow had gotten apart in their lives, who truly loved each other and just couldn't figure out a way to get back. And there's a moment when he says, "This is all we have. All we have is each other." And I think there's a moment in that's an honesty and truthfulness, and also the silence that's in the film at time, when people are when they're both just sitting there, but they're thinking, you see it in their faces, you see the emotions, no dialogue, just silence. I think that was powerful. And I think that could portray this sense of what an elderly person may face. It is not just the words, but it's what his emotions are feeling. And that's a universal story. And that's what appealed to me about Ready For It.
Please go ahead, Deborah.
Go ahead. I was going to say what inspired me originally was that my grandparents lived in the same room for 30 years and didn't have a relationship. And I thought, how can you do that? Literally 10 feet apart. He'd play solitaire all day and she'd sit and read and watch television, and then they'd come together to eat, and that was it. So that was sort of the catalyst for this story. And they were, in their 80s, and they lived into their 90s, but really for 30 years.
Well, one thing I'd like to say, being the fanboy that I am of cinema and of this film as well, is that the actors did play their age, whereas a lot of recent films that feature an elderly cast tend to be more comedies where the older actors try to act young, and that's where the comic beats come in. But in this case, they're acting their age, and of course that's appealing. I'd also like to add that when I was growing up, all of the elderly characters on television shows are actually younger than I am now, which sometimes gives me pause to think. Now, both Guam and Hawaii have undergone a cultural renaissance where a lot of traditional wisdom has come back into play, and that traditional wisdom comes from the elders. There were some one very excellent documentary in last year's Guam Festival about a noted blacksmith who was not only practicing his skills, but passing them on as well. Do you think that might make a subject for a film that could be either Guam or Hawaii based, but might have broader appeal, the passing on of wisdom, traditional knowledge from an older to a younger generation?
I think it would. I think that's an important story. And it is an honest story because that's happening all over. We are in a time of turmoil, a time of great cultural change, of uncertainty. One of the things that people said with the passing of Queen Elizabeth, it was like a whole era has gone, a whole part of their lives that they will no longer see, that they don't understand what's going to come next, what's going to happen, how do we go on? And I think that's where the wisdom of the elderly and the cultures that we have in Hawaii and in Guam can be of great help, not just to our local people, but to the world. I think our island people have a message of great importance right now to this entire world. We need to know about aloha. We need to know about caring. And we need to understand that it's not just words, it's a way of life. And we need to find a way to get back to that life.
James, I see you agreeing with Dennis. Do you have anything further to add from your perspective as a scholar and as an educator on Guam?
Okay, yes, I published a paper last year on correlative thinking in Micronesia, and this journal in Australia actually read the paper, Syncretique, with a K. And then they were interviewing me about the paper. And one of the points that I was making in the interview is that traditional Micronesian thinking, which actually Pacific thinking, Pacific philosophy, is environmental philosophy. And part of what has created this climate crisis is that scientific reductionistic model and Western anthropology that wants to separate humanity from nature. Whereas from the Pacific philosophical perspective, they're, part and parcel of each other. There is no nature without and there is no humanity without nature. And by seeing that fusion, you would be less likely to just take a dump all over the world and have to burn it up. So I agree, the wisdom of the elders being passed down through the generation, was the traditional approach and is the approach that's still needed. But of course, people are moving to the city and they're not paying attention to their elders. So that problem of urbanization and looking for capitalism. There is a group, you can check it out on YouTube, the Pagan Pioneers. Some 20-year-olds have moved up to the island of Pagan in the Northern Marianas Islands and are returning to nature. It'll be interesting to see, how long they can sustain this, but to live without all of that media influence and those biases of trying to sell products. So yes, we have a lot to learn from the elders, and the world has a lot to learn from the Pacific about the importance of relationality, what I call the inclusive middle. Western logic is based on the idea something is either true or false. It's called the exclusive middle in logic, right? A statement can't be both true and false. Whereas the inclusive middle, focusing on relationality of people, allows for more of the gray area. It's a both and kind of thinking rather than an exclusionary reductionistic thinking. And it ties into LGBTQ plus issues. Traditionally, that was not an issue in the Pacific. It was even socialized, right? Transgender relationships were built into the institutions, like the Fa'afini in Samoa, where your fifth son becomes your daughter. So we have a lot to learn from the Pacific. The rest of the world has a lot to learn from the Pacific.
And James, correct me if I'm wrong, that's true of Native American cultures too, in the Americas, correct?
Yes.
That there is, that sometimes transgender folks were seen to be wise, and that there is very much a nature-based relevance, a correlation between that way of thinking and many nature-based cultures.
Yes.
Nina, let me throw this back to you and ask you, are there any particular bits of knowledge and wisdom that you've learned from the older generations on Guam that you think might make a good documentary or the basis for a good narrative film? We want to get you started on your career here.
Honestly, I have learned a lot because I do surround myself a lot with my relatives, my older relatives. I think one thing that would make a good documentary is kind of from the standpoint where, like, my grandparents, they're veterans and they're also war survivors. And I think that learning from their experience is a completely different time. And their their environment was completely different as well. So my grandma would always talk to me about how she lived back then and how she was able to push through and persevere all throughout that time. And she was telling me, you need to never give up, never think it's too hard for you, because you will make it. If I was able to make through that hard time, then you can too. So I think honestly, the idea of just knowing that you're never, one, that you're never alone, and two, that you will make it no matter what, I think would be a good documentary, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I've always felt there's a good Manegnon film waiting to be written and waiting to be filmed. For our other participants, that was one of the concentration camps that the Chamorros were herded into by the Japanese toward the end of World War II. And there's just a lot of fantastic survival and resilient stories to come from that. Nina, I'm not going to let you go that quickly, because in this panel, besides looking at the elderly, we also want to look at coming of age films and how youth are portrayed in films. And I'm willing to put down $1 US greenback dollar to bet that you've watched more youth-oriented films than I have in recent months. Can you tell us what's the general portrayal of youth in films and television shows today, and how does it match to reality? What are some of the stereotypes and what are some of the things that are missing in the media portrayal?
Okay, as for the youth, I believe that now, after like pre-COVID, as compared to that, I feel like the more struggle of being a teen and at this time is well more shown. Whereas back then, I feel like they always portrayed kids my age to be like, oh, perfect, straight A's, doing well in school, focused, you know what you're doing, you know what you're going to do in life. Whereas now, I feel like there's more representation for the people that actually don't know, that they don't know what they want to do. They don't know if they want to go to college or if they're like struggling with mental health. I feel like that is really, it's developing to become more portrayed and not more of like a mysterious aspect. And I feel like that brings a good thing, because it makes people my age that are struggling, it makes them feel not alone. And I think that now, since it's becoming more common to see kids on television or on TV shows, it's more common to not be perfect. I think it does portray a more truthful sense of humanity, that we're not all perfect, that we do struggle, and that there are things that we don't know, and that it's becoming more acceptable to know that it's okay to not know things.
What would you say, Nina? You talked about wisdom that you feel has been passed on to you. What kind of wisdom would you pass on to us about your generation? And I definitely recognize the struggles that you discussed in several contemporary films and TV shows. But what would you pass on to us, and what do you need from us? How can we help in seeing you through those struggles?
I think honestly, the best way to help with the younger generation and these struggles is to listen, because I feel like some kids, at least from what I know, they always try to go like to their grandparents, but then they always end up being kind of like busy, or they don't understand, which I know that they can't help that because, the generation gap and the age difference. But I feel like just being there to be able to listen, and then maybe trying to give some advice from what you've learned from your life, because we've all gone through it. And I think just, being there and trying to let the younger generation know that you do want to help and you do want to be there to help would be a good starting point for this issue.
Well, I was going to agree with what Nina had said at the answer to the first question. In 2019, I joined Netflix finally, and I noticed the pre-pandemic movies that Netflix kept showing me were about teenagers saving the world. There were these apocalyptic shows, right? And then the teens were they were gonna be the only survivors, and they were gonna, kill the monsters and cure the disease or whatever it was, stop the rain, and save the world. And now I notice after the pandemic, Cobra Kai and Never Have I Ever. Have you ever checked out Never Have I Ever? That's a really cool show. Very funny. It is about issues, real life issues, and youth struggling with moral decisions and trying to figure what their path is rather than being superhero world saviors. It's a little bit more realistic. I thought that was interesting. The pandemic maybe taught us a lesson that the superhero is just too much comic book.
I think we all became, oh, I was just gonna say, I think we all became very vulnerable. And so what this is doing is it's showing that vulnerability, which normally, before really wasn't prevalent. So I think also the same with aging films is the same thing. It's just showing a different side of vulnerability.
From an industry perspective, that the bulk of directors, producers tend to be in that in-between age of the coming of age and the elderly. So that might be a valuable perspective in that they can see both sides. In other times, it can be an exploitative perspective for films on youth and films aged. Do you have any impressions of that? And is there a difference with younger filmmakers and how they see youth and coming of age, and older filmmakers and how they see, I'm thinking of Sidney Lumet, for instance, who made his final films. And there's from the Cannes Jury Prize, went to one of the oldest directors in the industry, a Polish director, who made a film about a donkey, but that's neither here nor there. But how do you feel the age in the industry affects the images of both youth and the elderly?
Well, I would say the industry, depending what you're talking about, you're talking about television or the film, the basic thing is that you have the creative people and then you have the bean counters. And the bean counters are the ones who are interested in making money. And that's the bottom line. And for example, if you're shooting a television show, the director doesn't have a lot of creative freedom to go certain ways. He has to meet a budget. He has to finish by a certain time. He has to make sure the show comes in at or under budget. That's what they're interested in. So I think when you're talking about independent films like what Deborah does, I think it's much more important because the director and the writers also have a vision of what they want to see, and they're more free to do it. We have to understand that the industry, the bottom line is making money. That's what they want to do. If your show doesn't make money, doesn't bring in ads, and doesn't have viewers, you're going to get canceled, no matter how good the show is, no matter how important the message is. So you have to look at that part of the industry, and I understand it. And you have to, when you go into the industry, you understand that part of it. That's on that side, it's about a business, it's all business, and you approach it that way. And you give your best, and you know that anytime they can pull you and cut your show. On the other hand, right, a lot of us actors like to do independent films and short films and work with people like Deborah and Stasia, is that it allows us to really show what our characters are feeling. It allows us to really get into the character, not just to give a network what they want, but allows us to really express or look into the depths of the character, to look into why he's feeling that. And that's so important. So it's a really important question, but we have to look at the industry. We have to look at the various aspects and know what we're talking about, because every part of the industry has a different aspect that plays a part in the directors, the actors, and the message. Would you agree, Deborah?
Yes, absolutely. And I think, this goes back to an early question, Tom, about audience and the types of stories that we tell for older people. And I think there are some phenomenal stories to be told, but in to touch on what you're saying, Dennis, it is about the bottom line. And so some stories aren't gonna sell in terms of, if you look at the, what do they call it? The four corners, where your film has to touch on certain demographics for it to be in a certain category to make money. So I think you're right, Dennis. I think it unfortunately sometimes it does come down to money. And so, like the Guam International Film Festival is a perfect platform to showcase these films that do have phenomenal stories, messages to tell, and can without having to, go to a studio or cost a fortune.
No, I think that's why the Guam Film Festival and festivals like it are so important. It gives us a venue, an avenue to tell our stories and to reach audiences that maybe the bigger productions don't look at. And that's why I think it's important and essential that the Guam Film Festival be supported, and it also continue, because we need film festivals like that to allow our stories to be told.
Yeah, Tom, you mentioned earlier too about the comedy in films about older people, or Nina even touched on how the stories tend to be about decrepit old people and old people stories, about ailing old people. Again, I think it's trying to touch on those other categories that bring in money. So if it's not funny, you lose an audience. If it's just one genre, so you try to have it be many things. And I know there are a lot of films too about aging people that are trying to be younger, for comedy. I mean, that is comedy. Some of it is very funny. But it's sad too, because we can't tell a lot of these amazing stories that are dramatic and need to be told, but it doesn't reach a wider audience, so it's not going to make money.
See, one of the important things, I think, whether you're young or old, it takes courage to live, and that's the story. It takes courage to be old. It takes courage and determination to get up every day knowing your body is not working the way it used to, and to face it still with some hope. It takes courage to be young and get up, not knowing what you wanted, but knowing that I have a dream and I'm going to keep going after it. So to me, that's important. And sometimes courage doesn't sell. It's the other types of stories that sell. The basic everyday courage doesn't always sell.
And I think the truth is, and that's why this is such a great script and why I was really excited about it, is, as Dennis and Deborah both said, it is a universal story, and aging is a universal story, because we will all be there in whatever way we age, whether it's super strong to all the way to the end, or declining to the end. And I do truly believe, as I was saying earlier, that either way that people age, young people still are a part of that story of aging, because young people are the caregivers. Young people are the watchers of aging. They see that it can go one way or the other, and that they will be taking one of those two paths. And that the beauty of, I think personally, the most profound work of life are those who are caring for people who are aging in the challenged way, in the ways that it's hard to get up in the morning, and sometimes you need an extra hand. And that, to me, is the beauty of young people in an aging story, is that they get to do, or might get to do, that kind of profound work with family. And it's important, and that's part of what makes this universal, is we all will be on one of those paths, either ourselves or with someone we love.
One thing that you're making me think about with the economics of filmmaking is the economics of the life cycle and how our economy has, you think about the stages of life. Certainly there's a difference between the newborn Elizabeth and the 96-year-old Elizabeth. But you think about who made up the stages of life. What is, childhood and adolescence and middle age and senior citizen all about? Keeping people in economic categories. And for example, look at the American education system and the summer break. It's based on sending people back to the farm. But people live in the city now. We don't have to go back to the farm in the summer, but we're still doing this 150-year-old agricultural model. And that kind of stuff, the industrial model that you need to retire. Well, now with the internet, you could do a behind the scene and not have to show somebody how old you are and run a successful business because of your category in life, because now you're past middle age and it's time for you to retire. And so that the economy is, driving the whole image of what we think of as childhood. And now that medicine has got everybody living twice as long, many of the great philosophers did their writing in their 20s, right? Remember, just a few hundred years ago, you went to the university when you were 16. There wasn't a public education system. And so you were writing your magnus opus by the time you were 20, 21, and you were finished by the time you were 45. You were passing away from sickness, old age, and disease at 45, right? So it is a serious problem now that people are living into their 80s and 90s, and that you don't have the energy to keep doing farm labor and manual labor and greeting people at Walmart. Who's going to take care of you? And it creates an economic burden. And so then you get those crazy commercials about your teeth and what kind of medicine you need at night. The economics, we need to really rethink relationality and the economy and how we take care of ourselves.
Here we have Broadway Joe Namath trying to sell me Medicare plans just because I watch CNN, but then the demographic for news does tend to run a little older. I want to take a few steps back when we were talking about the comedy genre, which I see as a film scholar. I mean, I like them. They're funny. Robert De Niro has done several of them, but they tend to be plot driven, and the actors are there for the sake of the plot. Whereas earlier in festival films, as Dennis was pointing out, we're talking about much more character driven films where the plot often flows organically out of the
recording in progress,
out of the characters. And again, thank to all of you for your kind words about the Guam International Film Festival. And I want to point out, it's also a terrific venue for young filmmakers too, that in many years, the Audience Favorite Award and the Jury Awards have gone to even high school filmmakers. And there are very few festivals that offer that kind of opportunity. So again, in trying to help Nina build her career, what kind of advice would you give to a young filmmaker such as her and her cohort that all participated in this wonderful workshop that was co-sponsored by PBS and the festival to get started in storytelling? They learned about imagery. They learned how to manipulate images. Now, what should they do with that knowledge to take the next step and create original stories that are going to achieve the levels that your film has?
My advice is more generic and general. Failure is the key to success. But don't be afraid to fail. and keep going forward after failure in whatever you do.
So Nina, I think you're wise beyond your years. And I would love to see you tell the stories of the younger generation with the older generation from your perspective, because those are the stories that we're telling from our perspective, and how, you know, it's from up down, and from your perspective, I think could be a fun angle. And you know, you bring experience that we have, but it's different experience because it's now, right? Like we're going through, we're having different experiences because of our ages. So for example, you know, in your film, you explore all of social media. I think that could be very funny from someone your age, maybe trying to teach someone in the older generation in your family, especially, I'm not sure where you're from or what your background is with your family, but you know, making that bridge into the 21st century, right? A lot of people were left behind. My grandparents didn't have a smartphone and a computer and all of that kind of stuff. So anyway, I think it would be wonderful if you tell those kind of stories from your perspective.
Can I say, I think that I agree. I feel like there's not that many viewpoints, whereas it's from the younger to the older, because I feel like it's always been the older to the younger. So I feel like, I think if I were to capture that, I think it would make a good documentary, or a good sort of just image for people to know that there are flip sides, you know, that especially nowadays, the younger generation is teaching the older generation. I'm from Guam, and a lot of the Chamorro culture, we always hang around like our elderly, our grandparents. And I do find myself, literally yesterday, I was telling my grandma how to work her iPhone because she couldn't figure out what was wrong. Or I was even telling my papa, how do you get this off the TV? Because he wanted to watch his show, but he couldn't figure out how to maneuver it. So, and I think that because it's such a common thing now, and for some reason it's still not a common thing within media, I think it would be a good thing to bridge the two. So thank you everyone for your advice as well.
My advice to Nina would be, first of all, stay true to your dream. This is a very tough industry, and there will be times it will try to change your dream or try to suppress your dream. Don't let it do that. Stay true to it. And remember, you're going to have a tremendous amount of patience and resilience, because failure is sort of the norm in this business. As an actor, if you get one audition, I mean, if you get 5 auditions, you get 1 role, you're actually very successful, but that's only 20%. And the other thing I would say is tell your story. The world needs to hear your story and your people's story. We need all the stories right now, because this world is in tremendous change and confusion. And I'm excited for your future. I'm hopeful because of young people like you. I think there will be a better day for all of us, but a lot of it rides on you. So stay true to your dream, work hard, be patient. You know, I'll tell a story that, you know, one day I went to 5-0 and they actually had the chair with my name on it. I mean, which is, you know, a big accomplishment. And this was the 4th or 5th season. And Daniel Day Kim, who played Chun Kelly, came up and said, wow, Dennis, you got a chair back. How long did it take you? And I said, well, not too long, 40 years. And Daniel said, yeah, this is about how long it took me, 40 years. That's how long it takes sometimes. But don't let anyone tell you it can't be done. There will people who tell you it's impossible. How are you going to make a living? How are you going to do this? How are you going to do that? You just tell them I have a dream and I'm going to live it, and you'll make a difference.
Let me jump in again in my fanboy state. Dennis has the distinction of being both in the original Hawaii Five-0 and the reboot of Five-0, the original Magnum PI, the reboot of Magnum PI, and Dennis's dad played Chin Ho Kelly in the original Hawaii Five-0. So it's quite a legacy. Let me ask you then, Dennis, you're acting over 40 years. Has your acting style evolved? Has age and wisdom contributed to the way you prepare for a performance and perform on screen?
Yes, I think any actor over time grows. He has more life experiences to draw on. He has more experience to draw on. He knows what's important. When I was a young actor, you know, I would play someone who aged from 7 to 70 on stage. This was a play I did, and I didn't leave the stage at all. So it was strictly body language how I had to tell the age. But looking back now, I would say there's so much more I could have brought to that because I understand age better now. I understand what it feels to feel loss that this character felt, which when you're young, you don't, you think you know loss, but you don't know loss until you say you've held your parents as they passed, or you lost a loved one, or you know success, so you know how long it takes. So all of that changes over time, and you as an actor and as a human being grow and bring all of that. Dustin Hoffman once said, every role is like a little autobiographical sketch of your life, because you're bringing things from your life into it. And the more life experiences you have, I always tell actors this, the more life experience you have, the more you have to draw on, the better actor you will be. But always be honest, be truthful to your craft. And one thing I've learned is always be prepared, be ready, know your character, and any way they want you to play it, because when you go to set, they may tell you, we want it entirely different now than you saw it, but you can do it because you know your job, you know your lines, and you know your character. And that's something I learned over 40 years. And I try to bring that professionalism to every job that I do.
Stasia and Deborah, let me ask you another age-related question, and that is, within the industry, have you experienced or witnessed age discrimination? And is it different for a woman in the industry than for a man? Growing
How long
older.
we have? You go ahead, Stasia. You can take away on that one. Well, we are moms. So both of us, yes, have had professional careers, but we also had to put that aside to raise kids. And we're coming back into a field that we left a while ago, and it's ever changing. And so not only is it difficult in some aspects to be a woman, but it's also difficult coming back as a woman. So time has marched on, and so we're playing catch up in that way too. I think, Stasia, I don't want to keep gabbing on.
I was just going to say, no, I want you to, but before I forget, because sometimes at my age I do forget things, but I wanted to say to Nina that this is something to consider as a young woman. Deb and I both kept one foot in, but we also wanted to be dedicated to family and to our children. And we've got 4 great children that we're really excited about, but we did keep a foot in, and we tried to stay active, and the short films helped tremendously with that, so that when we were ready to launch and do some things that we did in the last couple of years together, and that we got great validation for, that was very exciting to dive back into our careers. If you want to take a step aside, and you don't need to step out fully. There are plenty of women who keep going full time when they have children, but we happen to have partners who have very, very demanding jobs. And sometimes in the industry, I'm married to a director and a camera operator. And sometimes with 14-hour and 16-hour days, it's hard to have 2 people who have the same production schedule and have kids. So it's something to consider as you are a woman, because sometimes, not in all relationships, but sometimes women are the primary caregivers for kids. And depending on how active you want to be, it's something to think about. But as Deb and I are mature, I like mature instead of I like mature. As we've gotten to be a age, we started talking and partnering up in this way that gets us really excited. Like, hey, hold on a sec. Like, there's something really original about a couple of women in their 50s making films and making other things too. There's so the landscape is so broad right now. That's another thing, Nina, that's so exciting for you. When Deb and I first started out, we couldn't just edit our film. We couldn't color our film. We couldn't do sound design our film. We couldn't do any of those things. We had to go, I was living in Los Angeles at the time. I had to go down Abbot Kinney Boulevard in Venice and knock on the doors at 2 a.m. and say, do you guys have a junior editor or a junior colorist or a junior sound designer who might want to help me with my spec reel? And that was sort of how we had to do it. And that's a whole different world now. We sit side by side out on the lanai, coloring our film and doing sound design. It's so exciting that you have like everything at your fingertips now. So you can do anything. And there's so many different, not just a film or a short film or a commercial. There's so much content that you can create at so many different, in so many different ways, and so many different lengths, and so many different approaches, almost so many different genres. That's an exciting time for you, just to be able to throw out a 90-second thing on social media that really speaks to you. And that, as the women who are aging, we talk about it a lot, is my point. But finish what you were going to say, Deb. That was my non sequitur.
No, it's okay. Tom, you.
Yeah, well, we unfortunately have come to the end of our time, but I'd like to give you a chance to make a final comment or a shout out in the form of an elevator pitch, which means 16 seconds. I'll be timing, but who would like to start? Dennis, thank you.
My pleasure. I just want to say to all the people who supported me throughout all the years and all the fans of thank you. You made the difference. You made the journey special. And I look forward to seeing you again in the years ahead. And to all the people who are attending the Guam Festival, good luck. Hope you enjoy the films. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today. And you've made this journey very special. Aloha.
Thank you. James.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a very interesting conversation. One thing I've been wondering about, this imposter syndrome. Young people feel like they're imposters. They have a lot of anxiety over this issue. To use acting, all the world is a stage, and overcome this imposter syndrome by recognizing that you can be an actor in that situation and not an imposter. It's okay to be a secret agent. And maybe there's an avenue here for film and overcoming the imposter anxiety. But thank you very much for having me.
Stasia?
I just want to thank the festival so much and all the panelists. I enjoyed it very, very much. And thanks to Dennis and Deb for a wonderful, wonderful opportunity and a fun film to make with you both.
Deb.
I want to thank the Guam International Film Festival as well. We're really honored to be a part of it. I just want to say that you get better with age. And so Stasia and I are hitting the ground running, and we're only getting better from here. So I hope we'll see you again in the future. We'll have another wonderful story to tell.
And I think the Guam Festival gets better with age too. So we'll certainly welcome you back in a future festival. Nina, we began with you. We're going to end with you. What have you got to tell us?
I would honestly like to thank PBS. Thank you so much for the opportunities you've not only given me, but also other kids that are my age to go into the film industry, to dive into something new or to something that we do have interest in. And I'd also like to thank all the panelists. Thank you for all of your advice. I've learned so much, not only just from one perspective, but I've also learned from the older perspective. I've also learned from economics. I've learned so much from all of you, and I truly appreciate your time, and thank you so much.
Thank you. And Amanda, I'm going to kick it back to you to bring us home.
Thank you, Dr. Tom, and thank all of you so much for your time today. I hope all of you enjoyed today's session. This program is made possible by funding from Humanities Guåhan, the National Endowment for the Humanities, along with the Federal American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. Any views expressed do not necessarily represent those of Humanities Guåhan or the National Endowment for the Humanities. Right now, we ask our viewers to take a few minutes to complete a short survey. The link will be inserted into our chat box on both Zoom as well as Facebook. Also, be sure to join us next week, Saturday, October 1st at 9 a.m. for our panel on film and war with Dr. Galvin De Leon Guerrero, Valeria Golovina, and Dr. Michael Lujan Bavacqua. For those of you watching us on Guam, please join us. We are back at the Guam Museum this year from Friday, October 7th to Sunday, October 9, 2022. For more information, please visit our website at www.guamfilmfestival.org. On behalf of our panelists and the rest of our team, thank you so much and have a great day.
Aloha.